Okay.
Online people, can you hear us? Well.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
So welcome to welcome to the third panel called Multimedia and Social Media Narratives. I will present the first speaker, who is Pauw, and he holds a research master degree in comparative literature studies and a bachelor in English language and culture from Utrecht University. He's also a co-editor of the journal Human Animalia, and his research interests lie within the generative human-animal relationships in cultural expressions such as literature and photography. And the presentation is titled, as you can see here, A Photo Textual Encounter, Sara Baume's A Line Made by Walking. So please start your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that very kind introduction. So as was just mentioned, my name is Pauw, and I'll be talking to you today about the use of non-human animal photographs in Sara Baume's A Line Made by Walking. And this presentation is based on a chapter from my master thesis, in which I sort of looked at the mediation of animals in photography and sound recordings, and how this was ultimately, or is ultimately, remediated by literature. And by providing a close reading of Sara Baume's novel as a photo text, we can begin to see how the relational and the subjective are often fundamental to how we come to relate to animals. And as I will explain in the next 15 minutes, it is mainly through affects of a shared vulnerability and precarity that the transformative potential of this novel's narrativized encounters are achieved. By subsequently focusing on the excessive workings of Jane Bennett's vital materiality and think power, we can sort of follow these affects as they travel through the mediated encounter from phototext to reader, where this transformative potential can ultimately be felt and experienced. So the novel by Sara Baume was published in 2017, and it's her second novel, and it details the slow falling apart of Frankie, a young artist from Dublin. And the novel relates how she carefully tries to redefine herself through the taking of a series of photographs of dead animals. Retreating to her deceased grandmother's bungalow in the countryside, she decides to make a series about how everything is being slowly killed. The book is a collaboration between photography and text, or what has in recent years also been called a photo text. And the combination of photography and literature is, I think, uniquely suited to show an entanglement of the subjective and the evidential, since, as Edward Welch has noted, the photo text contains an inherent instability that is predicated especially on the photograph's own ontological peculiarity as the material trace of a slice of time, able to circulate and combine with other symbolic forms in unpredictable ways. Oliver Richon has also stated that in a photo text, the conventions of photography, so its two-dimensionality, but also the way in which it sort of frames the world, help to create an unfamiliar reproduction of our world. And this strangeness consequently points to the materiality of the photographic image, which becomes a template for the materiality of language. And in this way, a phototext works as a constant reminder of the material world that sort of surrounds us all. And the combination of photo and text can therefore allow us to see this world through new lenses and from unexpected angles. And it is exactly sort of this entanglement of text, photograph, and animal that plays a central role in Sara Baume's A Line Made by Walking. In this novel, then, the confluence of photography and text, I think, sort of already points from the beginning sort of to how both media work together to create a more invested narrative on the side of the reader. As you can see here, sort of by aligning the finding and photographing of the dead animals by Frankie, the protagonist, with the placement of the actual photographs in the novel, the fiction gains in veracity and immediacy, while our viewing of the photograph becomes more subjective. So we move beyond an appreciation of the material specificity, so the indexical quality of the photograph, and come to better understand how we engage in an imaginative construction of the photo's value. And throughout the narrative, Frankie similarly sort of reflects on the extent to which animals as well are constantly framed through human perception and thinking, both in relation to her own self, but also to sort of pre-existing cultural constructs, such as sort of Walt Disney and its sort of Disneyfication of animals. So while the narrative entangles these processes, it is the photographs of the dead animals that seem to be the focal point for the book's reflections on the constant mediation of animals. The photographs themselves, as you can see here, sort of are closely cropped, leaving only the animal and a small section of background visible. Surrounded as they are by text, their interpretation is almost entirely determined by the story that Frankie herself is telling. The photographs, however, have all been taken by Sara Baume, so the author of the novel herself, over a period of several years. And it was actually only later that they sort of became an important part of the novel itself. And I think that this further problematizes the indexical and evidential nature of the photographs in the story, and points towards how sort of a photograph's meaning is not necessarily inherent to the image itself, but is rather formed in the middle, so between viewer and photograph. The first photograph we encounter when reading through this edition of Baume's novel is that of a European robin, as you can see here. So the image is sort of placed at the top of the second page, and it depicts a robin lying on its back. Don't know if you can see it, but there is a small bit of dirt still on its beak. And Frankie explains that the robin has been thumped by a speeding windscreen, launched into artificial flight, crash landed. I'm only 100 yards from my grandmother's gateposts. This is why I decide to go back and fetch my camera. So the text here sort of adds a geographic specificity to the photograph and sort of remediates it as part of the fictional narrative. The photograph, on the other hand, adds not only sort of a factuality to the story, but I think also an embodied tangibility to Frankie's tale. Dropping to her knees after sort of getting her camera beside the robin, Frankie describes how old rain seeps through the shins of my trousers, smears across the screen. I point my lens at its motionless plumage. Click. So I think both the photograph and the text remediate each other in this section. And it is due to this enmeshing that we can imagine Frankie sitting on her knees in the undergrowth, taking this photograph of that robin. And Timothy C. Baker has explained that many of the photographic encounters and identifications in the novel emphasize a shared vulnerability and suffering that is further complicated by the phototext conflation of literary fiction and photographic documentary evidence. And in doing so, he states a line foregrounds a generic instability that reflects the breakdown of species divisions. So there's always already some sort of transformation almost happening at times. For Frankie then, the photography and the photographs become a way of attending to and connecting with the animals she finds and coming to understand her equally vulnerable place in the world alongside them. The confusing indexicality of the photos, combined with the subjective narrative of the novel, make it so that the reader comes to relate to Frankie's search for her place in a multi-species world through a shared feeling of vulnerability. And taking these photos ultimately becomes a way for her to sort of encounter the animal differently. So not through their alterity or symbolism, but rather as beings that she both lives and dies with. So affects of shared vulnerability and precarity are thus central to the novel. Following Jane Bennett, the animal bodies and photographs sort of seem to create a space in the novel, or moments in the novel, where we can see the workings of a vital materiality, of non-human bodies and things as existent in excess of their association with human meanings, habits, or projects. And an attention to the notion of think power subsequently allows us to follow this access as it travels through the mediated encounter from text and photo to reader. And think power here sort of being the curious ability of inanimate things to animate, to act, to produce effects dramatic and subtle. And the call issued by think power, I think, sort of finds its most direct response in the affect as access it provokes through human and non-human materiality. In the novel, however, it is only near the end that the affects of precarity and vulnerability start to truly confuse Frankie's anthropocentric gaze and lead her towards more attentive encounters. So the final animal photograph in the book is that of a badger who has been hit by a car. And as the bus that Frankie is on stops for a brief break, she lingers at the edge of the car park. And here she sort of finds the mammal lying on the hard shoulder. And a collaboration that begins with an anticipatory readiness, a sort of openness on Frankie's side, and a subtle vibrancy on the part of the dead badger, causes Frankie to take out my camera and lie on the road. I think this sort of bodily mirroring of the dead badger and Frankie is further foregrounded by the textual narrative. She notices that the badger is magnificent, and so I lie beside it, cheek against the tarmac, the smell of oil and dust and beast. I take picture after picture, a final showdown of concern for a creature other than myself, until the bus driver sticks his head out of the window to shout at me. I am holding everybody up. So the emphasis on both human and non-human bodies here recognizes their shared vulnerability, but also shows how Frankie sort of acknowledges this by assuming a non-human subjective position when she lies down and takes her photographs. And the photograph itself in the novel consequently makes us acutely aware of the badger's access outside of human meaning. The think power of the badger forces Frankie to acknowledge the creature's singularity and vulnerability. And even if it is just for a moment, she identifies with and sees this badger. The smells, both their bodies, the feeling of asphalt, her photographs, all come together here to sort of emphasize a shared world through mortality and vulnerability. And while I think sort of this whole, therefore, shows a dissolving of both species and ontological boundaries, the novel itself also points to an acute awareness that such realizations, however profound they may be, still do not allow for an actual experience of, for instance, the badger's world. This is evidenced in the text by the bus driver calling her back to the human world. Frankie can ultimately not go beyond her own human experience. What she has found, rather, is a new relational way of existing that pays attention to the excesses of the non-human world and recognizes the discontinuities and boundaries of her subjective experience. Ultimately, the photographs embedded in a line allow for mirroring of this experience, I think, in the reader of the novel. They create a mediated encounter in which the photo text comes to act as a transformative place. And as Nancy Pedri has argued, the reproduction of photographs and literary texts allows readers to accommodate what is imaged to their own personal convictions and to engage in an imaginative construction that reaches well beyond an appreciation of ontological specificity. And what the images in a line thus point towards is the impossible singularity of the photographed dead animals. The remediation that occurs between text and photograph consequently contextualizes and secures the reader's involvement in the transformative process. The affects of vulnerability and precariousness can be said to travel from the photographs that Baume initially took to their inclusion as Frankie's photos in the text, and finally to the eyes of the reader. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you for a very interesting presentation. So I will now present our next speaker. So while I do that, we can get the PowerPoint on if we have one. And our next speaker is Bilge Ece Çizmeci. And she's a PhD student of interdisciplinary humanities at Brock University. She focuses on non-human animals in visual, cultural, and literature with a post-anthropocentric perspective, intersecting with critical animal studies, affect theory, and critical post-humanism. Focusing especially on how to territorialize the human exceptionalist systems of thought and perception. And she's also the founder of the art making and research platform Animal Gaze Project. And the title of this presentation is Thoughts Were Head, Thinking Beyond the Human by Feeding Through Cannibalism. So thank you, or welcome.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, I will start right away. Okay. Comparing and analyzing two dystopian and post-apocalyptic literary works, one of which by David Macaulay, as you can see on the left, a graphic novel titled Pauw, and a novel by Agustina Basterica titled Tender is the Flesh, with a vegan evolutionist post-anthropocentric perspective and focusing on non-human animals as individuals. I argue in this sort of article and this presentation that cannibalism can be actually food for post-anthropocentric thought that expands the limits of empathy toward non-human beings. And I just have my abstract here because I don't want to repeat that to save time. Let me shortly give you a sort of introduction to these two literary works so you know what I'm talking about. In Pauw, after human beings disappear from the face of the earth and we don't really see any humans, from the very beginning we are faced with sheep. And we don't know why humans disappeared in the first place, but what we can guess is they probably ate each other and died, all of them. And the only land animals that survive are sheep, and at some point they begin to consume their own kind under the name Pauw, which is a product, without knowing it. It's the sheep or politicians who are marketing this product. And in Basterica's novel, once again, a post-apocalyptic world is built, and this time it is not sheep, but human beings, who are the only animals left alive, while non-human ones are made extinct due to a virus because they fear that they will actually catch that same virus, the humans. So in that book, there is no non-human animals. Macaulay's Pauw, I will start with that. Macaulay's Pauw starts with the end of the human species and ends with the extinction of all land animals, as sheep who had followed the footsteps of humans also go extinct. The final page of the story is a note to the reader to inform them about what happened after sheep also went extinct. This note tells us that ancient famous fish Tiktaalik, after the extinction of all land animals, takes 6 days to deliberate on whether to crawl onto the land, the dry land, it says, which could once again give rise to many land animals, like humans as well, evolving into different species. And it is a yet another creation narrative. And on the 7th, the fish, metaphorically likened here, of course, to God, decides not to. So in that sense, this final note of the book doesn't spark joy, even though the cute and funny illustrations of sheep lighten it up a little. It seems to suggest that the humankind is sort of doomed, and on the surface level, actually, the book uses sheep to tell a moral message about consumerism to humans while holding on to the stereotypical flockness of the sheep, which shows that sheep are only used for metaphor. But I argue that the work itself can be read beyond such simplistic narrative, and it does not renounce to humankind altogether. My analysis of especially Pauw has as you all know, probably this reference, that of the author attitude, in a sense that I look and read beyond the surface, beyond the author's intentions, because I believe that the work is more promising than that. And so once the sheep enter human houses, discover books and TV, they learn to read and speak. And in this case, it is the English human language. And soon after their exposure to the human way of living, they arrive at having thoughts, or in Macaulay's words, which is very important, I think, it says, schools were established, thoughts were had. The passive form of the sentence, rather than an active one, such as the sheep started thinking, hints at the passivity of the act. Rather than thinking for themselves, the sheep read and learn how humans used to think and mimic the human way of living. Therefore, it is not the capability to think per se that is gained by the sheep, but an assimilation of humanness, a mimicry that takes place. In that sense, Pauw actually narrates a time-lapse summary of Western human history, referring to how human civilization progressed. It says, it was a time of great prosperity. Everything was plentiful. Gas was cheap, the population grew. And you also even see like they have traffic, they are traveling with planes. While this narrative might be familiar to a majority of people, it should be noted that this human way of living is in itself a concept that is problematic, as it groups all human beings under a singular category, erasing the many differences in the way humans from different cultures, geographies live and see the world. Pauw tells the story of some humans only, showcasing the Western civilization, which cannot represent an idea of a singular homogeneous humanity as a whole. As such, this thinking of humans cannot be taken as the only way of thinking. In that sense, both Pauw and Tender is the Flesh criticize not being human in a general sense, but rather being human with a specific perspective, which I argue is arrogant anthropocentrism. So what is
the slides? Sorry to interrupt.
Am I not changing them?
They're still seeing like the.
Oh no!
When you manage to change the view, because they're still seeing like the non-present mode slides.
Let me see. Oh no! Oh no! Why isn't it changing? It is changing for me. I have no idea.
Or I can do it from here if you prefer, and then you can tell me.
I did make a few tiny changes, but
I think you need to. Sorry, I think you need to share your like the full screen instead of sort of the PowerPoint.
Actually, I shared the whole screen, but let me try again. Okay, let's see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so what you missed is, I'm sorry, what you missed is sort of these things. I added the definitions in the, like at the end so that I could save time, but I lost some time now. Sorry. Okay, let's go on from here. So what is the significance of cannibalism here? Cannibalism has been utilized as a literary motif to shock and draw attention of the readers by many creative works such as Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal, where he controversially suggests eating children in a serious yet satirical manner to draw attention to the fact that Irish people of the period were being exploited by the English. But why is cannibalism a disturbing, shocking practice to some humans? As a human's body becomes a piece of meat, the person disappears. Cannibalism is disturbing because it is a vulnerability that is close to home. If animals are alive, they cannot be meat, as Carol J. Adams states. As some and eventually all sheep become Pauw, this product that they eat, and some humans become special meat in the novel Tender's the Flesh, it is the same process which ends with the sheep and the human beings becoming absent referents. So if the reader can realize that sheep are non-human animals who are normalized as food in the non-fictional world, some of what these sheep find in the human refrigerators and the supermarkets are already made of their own kind. Therefore, it is not when Pauw is this as food made later in the story, but when they first discover and eat the human food that sheep's cannibalism begins. And now I will move on to a little bit more Tender is the Flesh. In that novel, Basarica chooses humans and uses cannibalism for a similar end, but without the non-human animals. Unlike Pauw, it is explicitly about the becoming absent reference of the non-human animals. Cannibalism of human beings in the novel raises the question of how far humans can go with othering and objectification. It asks, where does it stop? And just as non-human animals, who are referred to as livestock, are bred and raised to become meat. In this case, it is some humans who are bred and raised specifically to be turned into special meat. In this new order that comes after the extinction of non-human animals, some humans take on the role of the livestock, and it is the same process of stripping them of their individuality, freedom, and speech, which is a part of their objectification. They are no longer called humans, and it is not allowed, but heads, who are grouped into various categories depending on the quality of their meat. So if cannibalism sounds too bad, humans can rename it, just as sheep meat was renamed under the name of Pauw and marketed. In the dystopia of Basarica, human meat is marketed as special meat, and the strategy works. People start consuming their own kind because they start seeing them as not human, not one of their own. While cannibalism is literally about eating one's own kind, here in these narratives, the way someone is made into something reveals othering as the key factor in justifying the act. The production of human functions, Agamben says, by means of an exclusion and an inclusion, where human is excluded from the animal. The non-man is produced by the humanization of an animal, but also the slave, the barbarian, and the foreigner as figures of an animal in human form. And as you can see in the quote here, it says, in some countries, immigrants began to appear en masse. Immigrants, the marginalized, the poor. So these are the people who are actually first killed and eaten by humans before special meat is made. And the normalization of this started. And immigrants become food because they are the others, the less than human, according to the anthropological machine's definition of human. But how about animals? They are already excluded from the zone of care and empathy. They're already made into things by the definition that they are animals. Returning to the question of what it is that disturbs most human beings when they are made to think of eating human bodies, I argue that within the concept of cannibalism, most human beings with the given cultural background empathize with their human fellows and react negatively to this idea. As the limits of empathy ends with pets in certain culture, so does the reaction to consuming fellow creatures, because they are not seen and also not thought as persons, but rather things to be hunted, exploited, eaten. The way non-human animals, and specifically those classified as livestock, such as sheep, are stripped from their individuality and made into consumable others, is narrated in detail in Basarica's novel. Eating other humans is justified in this novel through making the human absent and at the same time other, for whom empathetic response is not necessary. And how would the readers react if Macaulay chose dogs or cats instead of sheep to tell this story? Another disturbing thought to be had, which generates a similar reaction of disgust and anger to cannibalism, is eating pets, because pets are considered as individuals in the Western culture especially. What lightens the story is not only the cute and silliness of the sheep illustrations, but also the underlying perspective of non-vegan readers. Would dogs or cats eating their own kind sound as interesting or as funny as sheep eating sheep? Looking at the concept of cannibalism through the lens of empathetic response and comparing this with pet eating reveals the role of one's capacity of extending their empathy to beings that are not human. In cannibalism, human beings empathetically respond to the act with disgust because they have empathy towards their kin. When empathy is extended to dogs and cats, the idea of harming and consuming them, depending on the culture again, also sounds horrible because they're not objectified, but rather subjects with whom many humans have an entangled relationship that is not based on exploitation, but rather care and even kinship. In Tender is the Flesh, the aim is to extend this empathy to non-human animals who are no longer considered as persons, subjects who value their lives and relationships. So in that case, Basarica makes the connection between the subject who is in the process of physical and epistemic violence becomes absent, and the object, the consumed flesh. Coming towards the end, cannibalism can be food for thought in these two fictional works as a starting point for humans to question their expandable limits of caring attention and empathy. Both tenders the flesh and Baume make visible the functioning of this machine that is fooled by arrogant anthropocentrism. Post-anthropocentrism stands on the other end of this perspective, which displaces the notion of species hierarchy and of a single common standard for man as the measure of all things. Therefore, with a post-anthropocentric perspective, life is not the exclusive property of one species, the human, over all others. And let's return to the post-apocalyptic ending of Pauw. The reader should take notice of the fish, Tiktaalik, the one that decides not to start life on land. Because yes, it is the apocalypse of a world order, one that is mostly dominated by human sovereignty, but there is life beyond the human. Life does go on without humans, and who knows what sort of new species could come into being. But what the reader can take from the story is also that to keep existing on Earth, humankind needs to exist differently without drawing the line of care limit between species. This could begin with taking on a post-anthropocentric perspective where nobody is forced to become things of consumption, with a realization that non-human animals do not need to justify anything to humans because non-human animals are here, and they are here with no less right than us to the planet. And like in A Human Manifesto, Patricia McCormack says, the modern and postmodern world no longer needs animals for human survival, not in most cases, although even if we did, what makes humans more special than animals? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So next up we have Daniela Menezes Sala. So if we could try the PowerPoint to see if it's working.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. I have a video. I'll try to see if it works.
It's before. Okay. So it's Lucas before. Sorry. I got the order mixed up there. So we have Lucas Rinzema first. So we will try your PowerPoint instead, and then we'll try yours afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey.
Hopefully both your PowerPoints will be working. So if you try that and getting it in viewing mode and see if you can change the slides, I will introduce you in the meantime. And so Lucas Rinzema is a researcher and master student in arts, media and literary studies at University of Groningen. He is working on a thesis on vegan ethics in farm animal documentaries. Besides this, and often also relatedly, he's a maker working on short, non-narrative, eco-critical oriented films. And the presentation we are going to listen to today is titled Articulating Atrocity, Documentary and Animal Industrial Violence. So now we have the PowerPoint up. Can we get it in viewing mode, perhaps?
Let me check. Is this working?
Yes. Yeah, and try to change slides. We will see it's working.
This is the second one?
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, great. Now you can start. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks. First of all, really sorry for being late. I wrote down the wrong time somehow. And then I'll get started. I'm presenting about a bunch of films today that deal with animal industrial violence on an industrial scale. And I'll be showing only a few images, I should note, because, well, first of all, because a lot of my presentation is based in a critique on the sort of depersonalizing rhythms these films can take on, where images become interchangeable and the individuality of farmed animals falls away. But still, there's going to be a few images that might be shocking. So, of course, feel free to look away or walk away, or yeah, of course. So I deal with documentaries that deal with animal industrial violence on an industrial scale. Those include most notably, I guess, animal rights films like the Animals film already from 1981, but also a film like Earthlings is very well known, or Dominion. I think this argument is also very relevant to a film like Cowspiracy or Eating Animals. And in the end of my presentation, I'll get back to Our Daily Bread on the middle of the bottom row here. I'll tell you about that by then. But I want to start by telling you an anecdote about Land of Hope and Glory, film on the bottom right here, which is also an animal rights film that shows a lot of very violent images from UK animal farming. And I was watching that when I was quite far into the research for this paper. So I had watched a lot of these films and I thought at least to some extent, desensitized. So I was just taking notes, switching back between the film and my note app. And all of a sudden, I switched back to the film and I saw this sheep getting their throat cut, of which I will show an image now to illustrate. And in this moment, suddenly this desensitization seemed to fall off and I suddenly had tears in my eyes and I really saw this particular sheep losing their life in 2017, apparently, as the image says. So my talk is about these. I want to theorize these kinds of moments, or think about these kinds of moments. These moments where depersonalizing rhythms are breached. So I'll start by doing a bit of conceptual work about this notion of breach, and then I will talk a bit about Earthlings, which is an animal rights film from 2005 that's very well known. And then I'll end on an observational documentary titled Our Daily Bread. Okay, so I titled this Articulating Atrocity because these moments of breach I'm talking about are moments which harbor tension in scales. So in articulation, does this. It allows me to ask when and how farmed animals become articulate and to insist on at least trying to hear their voices within depersonalizing rhythms and industries. And it also allows me to ask on a bigger scale to what and whom they are articulated. So it allows me to ask how atrocity is narrated or assembled or mapped, perhaps. So yeah, atrocity has the same kind of scalar tension. It points to intimate, personal, intense violence, but it also points to a scale that is so large that it becomes impersonal. And these moments of breach I'm talking about, they breach this tension. They interrupt generally depersonalizing rhythms by foregrounding the personal and the specific, the individual farmed animal. Okay, onto Earthlings from Sean Monson in 2005. It is a film that's very fast-paced, fast editing, lots of undercover footage from animal industries, lots of hidden camera footage. Very much an activist film and very much a paradigmatic US-American animal rights film. It starts on the image to the left of a globe, and it tries to stick with this almost global scale. It tries to point to standard practices very explicitly and not to excesses. And it espouses an universalist ethics, which is very clearly inspired by Peter Singer's concept of equality of concern. Or consideration, I think. Its narration takes the shape of a list, I think, rather than a plot. The list to the right, these are all the different title screens that are in a 30-minute section in the second section out of 5. So those are 30 different title screens in under 30 minutes, which makes it seem really systematic, and it evokes what Barbara Noske has called the animal industrial complex, which Richard Twine also wrote a few articles about. But it is also very much not a systematic list. It doesn't describe a very systematic complex in a way, but it combines terms like captive bolts, which refers to a device, with terms like poultry, which try to appeal to someone who knows these industries as a consumer. And something like pigs, which points to a species. So the moments of breach I want to think about in this film, they are very similar to the anecdote I told you about, which rests on what I would call mimetic identification. You can approach that phenomenologically, which is a form of, sorry, let me just grab my notes here. That's a form of bodily resonance across species difference, which enables seeing the individual farmed animal. In a Dutch article, which is maybe not the best thing to refer to here, but maybe you can run it through Google Translate if you're really interested. Ike Kamphoff writes about the chickens she has in her backyard, and she writes about this bodily resonance across species difference, in that there is of course species difference. Chickens have feathers, a beak, and wings that I as a mammal do not. Neither can I sense what it would be like to, for example, shake my feathers. But she also argues, poignantly I think, that I can feel the typical way in which a chicken places her toes, curling and unfolding her toes, in the soles of my own feet, which, like chicken toes, function as a point of contact between body and ground. I think this kind of identification and mimesis is what happened in the anecdote I told you. I felt the sheep's struggle or their hooves sliding across the chute she was trying to escape in my own hands, and I felt the knife across my own tendons. It's this identification, and suddenly brings out the individual, and it breaches the depersonalization and the desensitization that was there before, which also happens a lot, or which Earthlings invites you to do a lot, I think, in images like this, where a cow is hung from their hind leg, where, at least when the image moves, it invites you to feel the struggle, because this cow wakes up on the disassembly line, and it invites you to feel their struggle in your own, the muscles in your own abdomen and your own leg. Then, as a counterpoint to Our Daily Bread, or to Earthlings, sorry, there's Our Daily Bread, a film that's also from 2005, but it's very slow-paced, very clean, a lot of static, long takes and tracking shots. Sorry, it also shows very clean, very technologically managed settings, and it makes an equivocation between animal industries and other farming practices, which you can see to the left and to the right here. It tries to formally equivocate these things, but it also fails in a way in doing that, because indexical images are hard to contain, and farmed animals tend to pop out, especially in a scene near the end where we are in a 2-minute long take of a slaughterhouse where 2 bulls go through a knocking box, and they, which you can see in this image, they walk into this knocking box. They stand there as a worker approaches with the captive bolt, which is supposed to stun them, and they panic before the worker stuns them. So this again is to me something that invites a moment of breach in these long seconds where they panic and try to get out and evade the knocking gun. They invite an identification with the fear of losing your life, with this fear in being locked up in this big device, which is very different, I think, from this mimetic identification. It's very different from identification with bodily movement and pain. But it's also a moment of identification where farmed animals suddenly become articulate and breach this equivocation with crop farming. They breach their own depersonalization. So these serendipitous moments of breach are invited by these films, I think, and can point toward a vegan epistemology that's based in farmed animal identification. And I think I'm really running out of time, so I'll skip the reference that's on the screen. It's really interesting, I think, but I'll skip it for now. I think that this break in perception, this breach and identification and personalization of farmed animals, that the possibility is there, and that points to a vegan epistemology. That's the important thing here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very interesting presentation.
This and the same, I would say, goes for the drawings, especially in Baume. For Bilge, have you reflecting on the style of drawings, or like how it dialogues with the text? Because I thought they were really, I mean, very expressive, very provoking. I don't know, just I was wondering if you thought about it a bit. It's
shall I go? Yeah, but great. Yeah, so in the book, it is quite, or at least sort of also when you read through it for the first time, it is quite sort of, indeed, as you mentioned, sort of as if you're sort of encountering them yourself on the street in a sense. But it's also, what I found very interesting is, as I also mentioned, sort of that the placement of the photographs, or at least sort of in this edition of the book, coincides with sort of the narrative of the story. So as Frankie is taking photographs, they're also sort of placed within the novel. And I think sort of that only occurs in the UK edition of the novel. In the American novel, or in the American edition, they're used as there are 10 chapters in total, and each sort of has as title a different animal that she encounters. So there's a rook, there's a rabbit, there's a frog, I think. But they're sort of placed at the beginning of each chapter. And I think that sort of really shows the difference between sort of having them placed in the narrative itself, or having them at the beginning, almost more like an embellishment or sort of an illustration, as it were. And there indeed sort of, I also feel like the affective impact perhaps is indeed way less, in a sense. Like it becomes more something that you sort of see and go, okay, yeah, that's a rook, okay, and we move on. Whereas in sort of this novel, sort of, it really sort of shows, also in combination with the subjective story that sort of surrounds it, it really packs more of a punch, in a sense, sort of that it sort of really brings home the narrative one step further, I think. So yeah, I don't know whether that sort of speaks to your question or your sort of wonderment, but yeah. Sort of, so,
thank you.
Yeah.
Can I share my screen one more time so that I can show you some images from the book?
Yes, I guess yes.
Okay. Can you now see it?
Yeah, it's the conclusion now.
Okay, good. So I'm glad that you asked that question, because I am a bit more critical of the work because I didn't really appreciate the way that sheep are sort of clearly anthropomorphized in this story. And this is the first image that we see in the book, actually. It is a sort of gaze between the reader and the sheep, and we don't really see any humans in this. But as they become more human in the way that they look, I hope you can see that too. Yeah, good. So this is the part where sheep, where thoughts are had. So you can see that this is very, very like humanized in a sense. It's very mimicry, like it's obviously mimicry. And when I was discussing this with one of my professors at the university, I realized that, and this person is not vegan, etc., not like really knowledgeable in this. And I realized that their focus was on something else. So on a surface level reading of this book, what you get is mostly, oh yeah, humans are so consumerist, like we shouldn't consume without thinking. But the focus is more on the human. And the sad part is that sheep are really sort of drawn in a comical way. Even in a certain part where sheep see human clothes. And of course, some of them are made of wool. That's what you expect from entering a human house in most cases. And it's like, oh, that's where it went, it says. So it is like, it almost looks like a children's book, but it's quite dark, actually. That's why I was sort of criticizing in a way that he uses these animals to sort of make it, I don't know, less heavy on the topic. Like, it is cannibalism after all, but it looks sort of lighter than what you would see if this was a dog or cat. And so in that sense, I think I don't really appreciate the drawings, the way that they're made cute. And so in that sense, what I was thinking was, when I was reading this, I got angry at some point. And comparing it to Tender is the Flesh, it doesn't have any real pictures or anything like that. But the narrative itself, the words are so full of imagery that you really feel like you know that she's actually talking about pigs or other animals when she's actually talking about these humans who are turning into special meat. But you really feel it. And here it is sort of watered down, and like the Western history is like this, we are so horrible, this sort of thing. And in that sense, I can say that imagery here is beyond anthropocentric perspective. It is a bit too basic, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Richard.
Yeah, my question's for Lucas. You can hear me. It's Richard Twine here. Just thanks for mentioning the work in your presentation. So I guess the films you were talking about were quite sort of examples of quite didactic, activist intended movies. And I'm wondering if, and some of them have been cited as being quite successful in producing what you refer to as a breach, or what we also might call in English an epiphany as well. Like, for example, Earthlings has been referred to as the vegan maker, for example, for that term used. How do you think those sorts, that kind of genre of documentary compares to less didactic films? And I'm thinking more recently films which they're filmed, the intention is to film them in somehow through the perspective of a non-human animal, but they're less kind of activisty, I suppose, but then they still have some, I guess, more implicit moral messages. I'm thinking of the film Pauw in particular, if you've seen that one. And for me, I think it's difficult when you've been vegan for a long time to second guess what might be affective to a non-vegan audience. But I would have thought after watching something like Pauw that could be really powerful, especially without spoiling it, the final scene. So I'm just wondering, do you think, from your opinion, is there a relationship between breach and the degree of kind of overtness in terms of the way in which a film or documentary is produced?
Thanks for your question. I think as to a film like Pauw or Gunda as well, I think it's often very disappointing, first of all, how non-vegans tend to read that. I had the same sort of expectation which gets broken. But I think that the argument I'm making here is about films that try to grapple with the systemic scale of animal industries. And Pauw and Gunda are very personal and small in a way, so they don't tend towards depersonalization in the way that these very systemic films do. They very much stick with the personal, if that makes sense. And I think as to didacticism, I think I included Our Daily Bread because it's a much less didactic film. It's very much just observational and very long, minutes-long takes. And there is, like I said, this equivocation between animal farming and crop farming, at least in its form. So I think, yeah, that's where the same kind of scalar tension exists, the same kind of depersonalization and the same kind of personality that can at least break through it. But I guess I'm talking about serendipitous moments here. I'm not talking about something that has to happen, but something that is at least invited to happen by these films, and that from which a sort of vegan way of knowing can spring. Yeah, these are a bunch of associations to what you're saying, I guess. I hope that speaks to it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. Yes, there's somebody that I have also a question for Daniela. First of all, yes, I was kind of disturbed by the video, obviously, but I've seen, so I mean, I come across and sometimes I watch these social media videos which are so common. I mean, with all kind of animals, and it's very, you know, it has become a thing, like a genre in itself. So I was wondering, because you said that you're focusing on Peruvian context. So I was wondering if there's any specific to any in terms of effects, or I don't know, if you can elaborate on that specific focus that you're adopting, because they're also widespread, and obviously, I mean, the point of social media is to reach so many different places, but how relevant are they for the realities that you're focusing on? That's my question, basically.
So what I found researching these videos is that for me it's kind of hard to compare the specific reality of Peru with other realities, because I haven't found much research in general. So there's not really, and if you know it, please let me know, but there's not really research on these sorts of videos, how they're globally or in like the West that I can compare to. But regarding the specificities that I can think of and that I've been thinking of, and this is something I do address in the article, is that in Peru, the number of stray dogs is very, very prevalent. So these encounters that are the source of the video are actually daily encounters for a lot of people in Peru. And this is something I think it's not the same in the UK, for example. You don't just walk through the streets and find a lot of stray dogs, right? So what you're seeing is putting in media something that for many people is daily life, and I think that's very unique. And you also have communities that work with pets, capturing a different phenomenon different to the West, I think, which is community dogs. So some of these dogs have been being cared of by a community. They don't have a house, they aren't pets, but they do have some, they have neighbors that take care of them. And when the situation gets to a point where the neighbors feel they can't do anything, they ask for help from these organizations. So I think those are two very different settings from the UK that also relates specifically to the need for money, because these organizations don't have any support from the state, right? So I think I would say those 3 points.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much to everybody in this panel for intriguing presentations. And we'll have a short break, and we will meet up again on the other link for the next panel, which is panel 4.